Hello, welcome to the Ensemble Experience, a podcast series by the Choral Arts Society of Washington, where choir members turn the spotlights on each other. Each episode brings two voices together to share personal stories, memorable moments, and the history they created within our choir. Discover the bonds and experiences that make our choral community unique.
I'm Charlie Surf. I'm a board member. I joined the Choral Arts Society in the fall of 1973.
My name is Drew Halford. I am the Associate Director of Development at Choral Arts. I've been here in full-time capacity for about 3 years now, but I started as an intern at Choral Arts in 2018. I'm here now.
So I can tell the story of my entrance into Choral Arts. My friend in Boston, her sister-in-law, I somehow came to know was not only lived in Washington, but was a chorister. So I reached out to her using a phrase that did not exist. In those days, I got in touch with her. And I asked her what was the best chorus in Washington, and she said the Choral Arts Society of Washington, which she was a member of. And so I said, thank you. And then I came to Washington temporarily. I was with a political campaign, government campaign, 1972. And I was supposed to go back to Boston after Election Day, but they asked me to stay on, clean up the finances, so I stayed on. And then I stayed on some more, and I realized this was a great way to remain broken up from the young woman I wanted to remain broken up with. Plus, I found out that Washington was really a better place, at least for people who were 26 years old, than Boston was. So there was an ad in the paper for the counter-inaugural. I think it was the night before January 20th. Norman was going to conduct Leonard Bernstein was going to conduct a concert in the cathedral. And Norman was preparing, so I signed up for that. No audition needed. Unfortunately, then I got a call from a fellow who had been the co-treasurer with me here of the Massachusetts McGovern campaign back in the primary days. And he said, well, the FBI is here and they're going to audit us. And it was exactly the week that Bernstein was going to conduct. So I had to cancel that. Went back. And by the way, the FBI guy said, boy, you're so different. Just, we say we want to see such and such, and you just point to the filing cabinet. It was so different in the Nixon campaign, where they made us sit out in the lobby and ask for documents one by one. So we got through that. And the next thing, September came, and I decided I wanted to audition for the Choral Arts Society. So I called 244-3669, and somebody answered the phone, and I said, I'd like to audition. And I heard her say, oh, I'm sorry. There are no more auditions this year. And I said, really? The chorus is closed, even though it's one day after Labor Day? And she said, well, yeah. Then I heard later that this was Shirley Scribner, and she said to Norman that night, well, I got this strange call. It was a guy who went through the call, and he said, oh, he sounds like he's been around. Why don't you schedule him for an audition? So a couple of weeks later, I auditioned, and Norman pulled out a piece by Schoenberg that he had put on the program. Fortunately, the conservative Schoenberg. As Wayne Shirley once said to me, wrote tonal music all his life, in addition to the atonal. So this was tonal, but it was still not easy. And we went through the entire piece, about 7 minutes. And he turned to me and he said, well, I've been saving a couple places in the bass section for good readers. That is how I entered the Choral Arts. It was only a couple of weeks after that he said, well, I've looked at everybody's audition sheet on which you had to give your age. And he said, I've done some arithmetic. And the average age of the chorus is 30 and a half. And of course, I didn't think anything 4 years older than I was. But it has changed a bit since then. The oldest section at that time was the bass section. The average age was 36. There was another interesting thing was that we were not invited to sing with the National Symphony that year or the next year, and maybe not the year after that. Why was that? We were on the unfair list of the American Guild of Musical Artists. And how was that? That was because we didn't have any paid singers, and they said we were artistically too good not to have paid singers. And Norman's position was quite stubborn. He said, if I can get singers as good as I need without paying them, why would I pay it? So eventually, like 3 years later, a little negotiation occurred, and lo and behold, we were off the unfair list, and the National Symphony could invite us. We signed a contract with AGMA. I think the contract said that if we hired or used any AGMA musicians, we had to pay them scale, which is something Norman wanted to do anyway. About 4 years after that, I was elected chorus president, which again was a total accident. I had volunteered to collect money for a couple of things. And as a result of that, everybody knew who I was. So I think I just won the election on name recognition. So that also coincided with Slava's first visit. He came to Satterley Hall to conduct a rehearsal. And Norman told me to go out and meet him and make sure he got to the right place. So I met him. I introduced myself 50 yards from Satterley Hall. And he was towing this cello behind him on wheels. The cello case was on wheels. And I offered to carry that or tow it for him. And he gave me such a dirty look that I realized I had really put my foot in it. You don't separate Slava from his cello. And that was about the time, or maybe it was a year later, when he came to Washington as the National Symphony Orchestra's music director designate. And he had a look at what we were doing. He called up Norman, and he said, actually, I don't think he called up, and I think he called Norman down to his office at the Kennedy Center. And he said, Norman, I promised Benjamin Britten on his death that I would do a war requiem in his honor or in his memory. And you have programmed the war requiem this May. And I would like my war requiem, which will be the following year, to fall on fresh ears. So, could you please do something different in May? And I'll tell you what, if you do that, I'll invite you to be the War Requiem chorus for the National Symphony next year. Well, Norman couldn't say yes. He said, I'll get back to you. And he convened a war cabinet around a table in a restaurant. There were about 6 of us having lunch. I was there as chorus president, I guess, and he told us what the story was. I was like, who the hell does he think he is? I mean, really. And rest of the people at the table were quite unanimous, which they were saying, look, if the conductor of the National Symphony asks you to jump, you just ask how high. Well, I was definitely wrong. Sure, we didn't get to do the War Requiem, but it was an amazing experience to do the War Requiem the following year, in which, of course, it turned out that the soloists were as close as Slava could get to the soloists that had premiered the work 13 years earlier. His wife had been the soprano, representing Russia. Peter Pears had been the tenor, representing England. I think Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau had been the baritone, representing Germany. He couldn't get Fischer-Dieskau. We had something like 2 out of 3. It was a wonderful performance. Nobody who ever sang it could possibly forget it. So that was one of the high points of the 70s.
And we just did the War Requiem in 2019 or 2018. Recently was what we kind of saw, right?
Well, you know, at my age and with my experience, I remember the first time, but the rest are often a blur. You know, we're about to do the Creation. Well, I first sang the Creation at age 18 in the Heidelberger Bachchor, in German, of course. And to this day, I can remember the German words really a lot more clearly than I remember the English words. Of course, the German is very idiomatic. English, not so much.
Oh, that's wonderful. I definitely have a less extensive history. But
That's easy.
that's it. I started with Choral Arts, as I mentioned in the intro. I was an intern in development and fundraising in 2018. So I was a sophomore in college, and I was on this path of arts administration, arts management.
Were you at AU?
What was that?
Were you at AU?
No, I was in Ohio. I was at the Ohio State University. So I was end of my sophomore year, and I had family who lived in Alexandria at the time, and they had offered a couple years ago when I started college, when I was kind of going on this path, to host me for a summer. I was an intern. They'd love for me to stay there. I'd commute with my uncle and that was the plan for a long time. So I started applying for jobs, internships, and that time I think I applied for a bunch. And one of the ones I did was with Choral Arts. I remember I applied for it in beginning of February, I think. And then within a couple of weeks, the deputy director at the time, Karen Frame, reached out to me, said we'd love to have an interview. I did an interview, and then one thing led to another, and I was offered this internship. And then I called my aunt and uncle and said, the top.
Can I mooch off you?
Yeah, pretty much. And so I had chores. I did things. I made dinner. I cleaned up. But yeah, so I started on middle of May, because our semester ended first week of May. And I remember my first day, because I was basically from Alexandria. My uncle worked in downtown Arlington, pretty much. And we would drive in, he would park in his garage, and I would get in the metro from Arlington, which was, I think it was Pentagon City, one of the ones down there on the yellow line. And I would go in, and then I would metro from his office, essentially, in the Gallery Place. And at this point, the office was in the Wisconsin Avenue one in Friendship Heights. So then I'd get on the metro from there, go up to the Red Line. It was a fun commute. So I'd usually be in around, I'd do like about 9:30 to 5:30, pretty much every day in the summer of 2018. But on my first day, I felt it was very scary. The first time, doing all this. There was an issue on the metro, and everything was completely just stopped. There were no trains, and then I had to take an Uber, and I was about an hour and a half late to my first day at Choral Arts. And I was emailing Karen, and I was like, sorry. And I was like freaking out, and I was like, oh my gosh. But of course, these things happen in a place like this. Things like that happen. But it worked out. So that entire summer, I was fully in development. We were doing a lot of planning for the gala that was happening that winter. So a lot of my job now is work with the gala that happens so far in advance. I'm pretty much for 8 of the 12 weeks of the year, months of the year, I'm working on the gala for the next year. I'm usually a little bit more than that. So I got a really good sense of how things were at Choral Arts. I stayed in touch with everyone when I went back to Ohio. I graduated in 2020, and I got a job at a different choir, Children's Chorus of Washington, in 2020. Worked there for a couple of years, and then a position opened up here at Choral Arts. Same thing. I applied to Karen, and then I heard back, an interview, a couple interviews, and then I've been here ever since. So
Cool.
that's been 3 years almost. I started officially full time in April 2022. So. But yeah, it's been definitely an exciting experience seeing. I still look back. There's documents that I open now that I know it's something that I was working on. I see my name in other things that I did, 6 years ago at this point, almost 7 years this summer. So, but yeah, that's my story.
My daughter, when she was an undergraduate, which was about 10 years ago, we knew Ann Kaiser. She knew Ann Kaiser. It had already helped her. And she found out that Ann's father had founded the Middle East Institute. And she was majoring in Middle East studies. She applied to the Middle East Institute for an internship, and they gave her an internship. So she arrived here on a Monday in June, and they said, so you're putting out the newsletter. When? Well, the newsletter goes out this Thursday. So that's what I thought of as a baptism by fire.
Yeah.
I don't understand how she did.
Yeah.
I myself had been an intern many years earlier. It was when General Motors was following, they had sticked a private detective on Ralph Nader, who was saying bad things about the Corvair, which was a GM car. And he was testifying about this in Congress. Of course, in those days, there was no security on Capitol Hill, so I walked a few of my friends. This was during spring vacation. And I heard him testify, and then a break. And he went into another room. And on a whim, I followed him in, and I said, so to volunteer for you this summer, if possible. And he said, send me your resume. So I went home. I looked up in the dictionary what a resume was. I created a resume, mailed it off to him, and he hired me for money. And of course, he stopped doing shortly after that, ran out of money. He said, the laborer is worth his hire. Well, I spent a happy summer turning, a happy but hot summer, because not only was my house not air conditioned, but my car was not air.
Oh, no.
Of course, that was before Metro, so I drove everywhere in my car.
Yeah.
Good news is the place was fairly empty. Park.
Quite different now.
It's
Different the zones and everything.
Oh man.
Is there like a performance or just like a moment from like your time in Choral Arts that just like sticks out as like the moment?
Oh. There were so many. Well, it is hard. Pick one.
I've been thinking with those two. It's not the definitely the different, not necessarily a performance that we put on, but one of the there are two that really stick out. It's the one was all of the Capital 4 performances. I know that that's a little bit of an interesting experience for not not something that we put on, not something that we necessarily when we look at this giant list of everything that we're in, we're so many other things happening that day, and our contribution to that is definitely very, very refined. But just being out there on the Capitol.
Well, it used to be more, we really used to sing quite a lot more. Capital for heat, the number
heat,
one.
yes.
And rain is number 2, memory.
I wasn't out there when I think it was the 2022 when, there was always is the danger of that, but going into the conservatory, or like the greenhouse, right next to the arboretum, not arboretum, but everyone running over there, and then in shelter in place. I've never been a part of that, but it was a couple of years ago. I remember getting the way we communicate that with emails, and I get all these emails about we're in the shelter in place, and then it's like 9:30, and I'm just at my home, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm like outside, I see the rain, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it makes sense. They probably need to get in. But no, it's performances like that where it has like a greater purpose. I think it everything that ties back to, that's kind of a national performance, but like tying back to what we do in the greater DC community, those are really the moments that stick out to me, and that's.
Yes, you're reminding me of Martin Luther King. So Norman used to do annually Martin Luther King concert. It was free. It was in various places. One year it was in the then new Martin Luther King Library. And so the problem was it was snowing, but it wasn't snowing quite enough to keep us singing. We sang, but I counted all the people in the audience, 9. And it was shortly after that we stopped for a couple of years doing any Martin Luther King concert. And we got involved with Martin Luther King National Holiday people. And Norman got the idea that we should make a big deal of it. And in fact, rent the Kennedys. So he asked for a big grant from the DC Commission on Arts and Youth. At the time, I was the treasurer, and the executive director was Ralph Knapp. Ralph called me up and he said, listen, they've asked us to appear in front of a panel. And so I want somebody there who could talk numbers. Would you go with me? So I said, oh, okay. And it was actually across the street from the ACLU office where I worked a lot. And it was in Ted Gay's office. He had a frame shop, and he was a friend of my boss. So, fine. I stood up there and I looked around the panel and I realized there were only 4 other people and I knew. And one of them really owed me because she had airmailed her 10-year-old to our summer place for a week. And then we airmailed back. Definitely. So the chairman started out by saying, well, very sorry, but we're here to tell you that we're not going to fund you. We don't any longer fund white groups singing for Black people. And so there was a short silence, and I said, I think you've got this all wrong. It's quite different. And I proceeded to go on for 3 minutes about how our group was, going to be Black and white singers on the stage, and that there would undoubtedly be Black and white people in the audience. Was the category. We were singing for a totally Black audience. And I have no idea what else I said. But at the end of it, the chairman said, that sounds interesting. Why did you write that up and send us a proposal? So wrote it up, and they put us. Wow. And we got to the Kennedy Center for our Martin. Well, 1989.
I was going to say, we were going through, we have, I think in our our library now, but there was these like cassette tapes, recordings from all the MLK rehearsals and the concert from early 90s in the Kennedy Center. But I was thinking about when it actually started at the Kennedy Center. Oh, 80. That's incredible.
Yeah. Been through several iterations partnership. In the early years, we did it 8 days before the holiday. So that would make it like January 9th.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Christmas speed.
Right after Christmas. So we get 2 rehearsals, a Tuesday and a Saturday. And then we perform on Sunday night. So I guess we did probably pretty easy stuff. And it was a relief when we started partnering with Washington Performing Arts. They said, well, you ought to do it in Black History Month. So February, that gives us a lot more time.
Yeah, I couldn't know, man. Even we're talking with Laura, our chorus manager, and just with, this year's was, pretty much end of January, almost, the 2nd of February. Having it, I've seen it both ways, but having it on like mid-February, that's perfect, because it's middle of Black History Month. It has a lot of relevance still, but it also has time to make sure it can be the best program it actually can be. And the partnership of working with that is definitely a highlight, though. That concert is always something that, I mean, the impact of it is definitely very clear. We have return groups that come to it every year, both that we do an outreach, but also those that come and support us. It truly is a very, very impactful concert. Still has a lot of meaning to it. But yeah. Anything else that you want to add to the Choral Arts story? I know it's definitely a 60 years is quite an accomplishment, and I've definitely, even that I've only been part of in total about 4 or 5 years of that is barely a fraction of it, but I know I can definitely tell you.
Yes, it's too bad you didn't get to know Norman.
Yeah, no,
because his shadow is still falling over various things.
It's the one thing I hear. I've only ever heard recordings of him, and I never met him, of course, and I can still, I feel like I do, in a way, and that's just like all the stories, and I feel like everyone has a different Norman story that I've heard. Very, very few times do I hear the same story about Norman, and I think that's really a quality that you can tell how impactful he was if everybody has a unique.
I think that's true. His biggest strength was that he made you feel as if you had a personal relationship with him, even though there were 167 other people who had that personal relationship. And he really cultivated that. He and I would talk on the phone, especially in the early years, pretty often, which I think I appreciated. Eventually, I said to myself, wait, there are 160 people that he's close to. This is kind of amazing.
Definitely, I feel that I definitely, when anytime I get to talk to anyone, and so many of the members now, we have so many new members over the past couple of years, especially after COVID, and I know that they have their own. They heard all their stories of Norman, and it's definitely, I'm sure I've talked to some of them about, just like they asked me about Norman, and I'm like, well, I can't help you on that, but I had a conversation with somebody started last year, about that, and that's definitely, they were talking about with some other members of Ann Stommer, like new members, and even some of our members who haven't been with us that long, they still sing with Norman. They have that history, and it really, it's quite inspirational to see, and his everything he did for this organization is definitely still felt.
Maybe we should take the book that people call the Norman
book, yeah,
which was from about 2012, around the time he retired, and put some of it online for our members, so that they can get more familiar with him and a little bit of why people are so close.
We might have something on that coming up, so we will definitely kind of tease it here, but we might have something that goes into that range, but more to come. We get forward in our 6 years.
Right. Great.
So yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Ensemble Experience. We hoped you enjoyed hearing these incredible stories from our choir members.